Hey guys, this is Gatsby with Tape, and today you join me for episode 32 of Road to Colonisation, and we start where we left off in the last episode, with the Jool freighter kind of halfway through its burn to Jool. Turns out that those booster engines didn't burn for as long as they thought they would, and this ended up having to be 2 burns. It's actually going to be 3 burns. We're just doing a small burn now to leave Kerbal, and then in solar orbit we're just going to complete our burn to Jool. We have the Delta V. It's a little wasteful, but this just has a terrible thrust-to-weight ratio because it has 6 nuclear engines pushing just a ridiculous amount of mass out to Jool. So anyway, it does take a long time to even do this little burn, so we'll cut through most of it and just watch it start to leave, kind of sort of rising above Kerbal in this shot, and kind of a nice little scene. But yes, you can see we've escaped Kerbal's influence now, and slowly pushing our apoapsis above Duna to try and make as much use of the O-berth effect as possible. But eventually that kind of gets redundant, and we do leave Kerbal and complete our burn, but again, we will have to do another burn in a little while to actually reach Jool. So yes, we complete it there, and that is done. Now we move on to the planes, the Nighthawks, which are my Laythe to Laythe orbit transport planes. They're on board the thing that will become the Jool freighter, of course, and this is getting ready to leave, firing up its engines, firing up that mainsail to mean that this will only take 1 burn, because I really don't like doing multiple burns. It just starts to take quite a lot of time. But anyway, yes, that won't burn through the whole of this, though, because it's quite inefficient to use liquid fuel oxidizer for this kind of thing. So here you can actually, you'll see that it has flamed out, and the thrust-away ratio is lower. Yes, you can see it's all not burning anymore, but we've gotten through about half the burn using that mainsail, and now we can complete it with these 4 nuclear engines, which is absolutely fine in here, which is completing it, and that's actually locked in. Once we do the plane change, we'll actually get our encounter with Jool, and we'll be able to arrive and go to Laythe. And now the final thing, the 6th craft. This is the miner, the Bop miner, which will be mining fuel on Bop, sending it up to orbit of Bop, and then over to Laythe to keep our colony running, to keep all the fuel in all of the vehicles, which is of course very important, because we need to be able to leave Jool and leave the surface of Laythe, all that kind of stuff, and that all requires fuel. Also, you need a little bit of ore for the fully self-sustaining life support system. Yes, so we also do get through this burn. Most of the burns, I think almost all of the burns, will be cut through in this episode, because there's quite a few of them getting to Jool. We've got plane changes and orbital insertions coming up. But yes, we complete this, and we will get our encounter with Jool. Now we're just back in solar orbit, with the freighter doing its final burn to get up to Jool. And this takes a really long time. You can kind of get an idea from those little shots, but eventually we do get our apoapsis up to Jool, and we pull it in. I do spare you all the long burns, there were a lot of them, but now we get a nice shot of the whole fleet heading up there, although probes are turned off in the map because there's so many, so there's only 5 of the vehicles. But then the first vehicle to do its plane change, so it'll actually reach Jool at a reasonable angle, is the freighter again. So another fairly long burn. I mean, it's fine because I just leave it on and then just watch a video or something, because these take a while, but that's the kind of beauty when you're out in around big bodies like Jool and the Sun, is you just have all the time in the world to just serenely do these burns. And eventually it does complete it, getting into a nice trajectory, just into Jool, and actually kind of passing Laythe, but I think it will do its insertion around Jool and then meet Laythe, because that's just an easier way of doing this. Next up is the planes, the Nighthawks. They're doing their plane change now. This will be much quicker, although this is down to 4 nuclear engines as well, so the thrust-to-weight ratio's a little rough. There was a lot of burns in this episode, a lot of really long burns, which is fine because you can just leave it. But yeah, and of course this gets itself its encounter. It's actually going to encounter Tylo on the way through. This was a bit of an accident, but nice, because I wanted to do at least 1 gravity assist. So we're going to use Tylo to get ourselves into orbit of Jool for free, and actually into a pretty good orbit right next to Laythe. So yeah, a little bit of fuel saving there, which is good, because the vehicle behind this is the fuel shuttle, which will require a little bit of fuel to complete its job, so it's nice to get there with a little bit of fuel. So the next plane change is, of course, the fuel shuttle and the fuel station, which will be going to Bop to be part of the fuel system. And if I can actually focus on Jool, we can see that it gets its encounter quite nicely. I actually originally set this up to go to Laythe, because it was just in my head, I was like, everything goes to Laythe, but no, then I had to change it. And now, of course, the Endurance, the big colony ship, is doing its burn, which takes a little while, because I've switched off the big booster engine, because it doesn't need it for this. But yes, we get a slightly skew-if encounter because it's actually not a particularly controllable vehicle, but it's actually fine. We're just leaving it like this, we'll be able to encounter Laythe, no problem. All of these vehicles have quite a lot of Delta V, so yeah, you can see I can just do a little bit of a retrograde burn and stuff, and we'll meet it. And then, of course, the Concordia needs to do its burn, the little taxi, as it has become, the Jool to Kerbal taxi. On its third mission, just a rather glorious vehicle. It's going to encounter Laythe straight up, which will save some fuel getting into orbit, which is nice because it's not really built for these kind of missions. And then finally, the miner is going to get its encounter so that it can head up to Bop and start mining fuel. It was another one that I set up to meet Laythe, but when I was on the way up to Jool, I was like, wait a minute, those ones aren't going to Laythe, can they still get to Bop? So if I'd had a little more foresight, maybe they would have done better, but it was fine. Then we get another nice shot of the fleet heading to Jool, all 5 vehicles drifting up there, looking rather glorious. The colony ship will actually get there first because it left first, and we get a nice shot of it making planetfall down to Jool. And then we just need to start rotating it, which takes a while. I thought I'd just show you. This is at 4 times speed, and the video is sped up to 4 times speed, so this is 16 times the speed it takes to turn. It's a very not turny vehicle. I didn't include any reaction wheels or RCS on it because I'm an idiot. So yeah, but it does the job. You just have to turn before you make the burn. That rhymes. That should be my saying. You gotta turn before you make the burn. Hashtag inspirational, hashtag deep. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to make orbit now. Luckily, we still have that booster engine to make this a slightly less long burn, but it will flame out now. Again, this is a pretty high performance vehicle. That booster engine is the only one that has actually stayed firing all the way to Jool. And now we're down to the 8 nuclear engines, which actually provide a pretty good amount of thrust to weight ratio, and eventually get us into a nice orbit, which will encounter Laythe. It'll actually get to Laythe before anything else even gets into orbit of Jool. And we've just got to pull that around a bit so we come around on the right side so that we are orbiting the right way to make things a little easier. So yes, this will just head up there now. We get a Kerbal out, we get some world firsts. I take some science to try and send back to complete a mission about sending science back from the orbit of Jool, but that doesn't, I don't have any communications device on the vehicle, so that doesn't work. But anyway, we do need to do a bit of a plane change so that we can come in on the equator, so that it'll be easier to meet up with everything. So that's what we're doing here, just locking it in, and then we'll be able to get into orbit with some fuel remaining, which is nice. It'll be good to just have some bits of fuel around Laythe so that we can start running the base quite, you know, because we're going to need fuel to go to Bop and get the fuel and stuff like that. We need fuel to get fuel, you know. Anyway, so now we just got our encounter there with a little plane change, and then we approach and get one of the most beautiful shots I think I've ever seen of the Endurance just kind of sandwiched between Jool and Laythe, looking rather beautiful. And that'll probably be the thumbnail, so you've already seen it. But still, I thought that was just really nice. It was just set up quite nicely. I always love the Jool system. There's just so much in the sky, and Scatterer makes Jool look so good. I've said quite a lot in these 2 series how much I love Scatterer, but I fucking love Scatterer. It just adds a little bit of something to everything. It makes the water look nice. It makes the atmosphere look nice. The sun look nice. It's good shit. Anyway, eventually we do make it into orbit and just get it all circular there. And the colony ship has arrived at Laythe. At long last, after however many episodes, we are finally in orbit of Laythe with the colony ship. The job is not yet done, but the Kerbals are feeling rather happy and really hoping that everything else gets into Laythe because they actually don't have gets into orbit of Laythe because they actually don't have enough fuel to come back to Jool by themselves. Anyway, I actually noticed Laythe looking a little bit weird. It was a weird shape, but I realized it's being shadowed by Val. That's again Scatterer actually put shadows on planets, so you can see here it just looks like a really weird shape, and it's just really cool. Val's just shadowing it a bit. I always love the eclipses with Scatterer. Anyway, so yes, the miner is now getting into orbit of Jool, and we'll head up to Bop. Yeah, this actually is a fairly decent. It's got tons of Delta V because it's just one vehicle. So you know, it wasn't too hard to give it lots of Delta V. Not that it really needs it. This booster will have to just kind of be ditched, but it does actually have some docking ports on it, so I can go and grab the fuel out of it, actually. I didn't think of that. But yeah, free fuel, cool. Anyway, so we get our encounter with Bop, the little world, where we'll get all of our fuel. Is Bop the one with the... No, I think Pol's the one with the Kraken on it. God damn it. Maybe I'll go see that Kraken at some point. We're going to explore Jool a little bit. We've gotten here. Well, not entirely yet, but after this episode we will all be here. And then we'll need to do a little bit of exploring. I might go and find that Kraken. I have found it before on a live stream. But yeah, I'd like to see it again. Anyway, now we need to, of course, do our plane change because Bop's in a bit of a weird plane. It's a small moon, so it's just sort of floating around kind of randomly, which will actually make the fueling operations a little more complicated, but hopefully still profitable, and hopefully more efficient than being on Pol, which is further out, but in a slightly better plane. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm sure everything will work out well, as it always does with things I do. Nothing ever goes wrong. Anyway, though, so yes, we're going to just fly on up to up to Bop now and say hello, grab some fuel. Actually, I don't think we're going to land right now, because, well, we don't need to. But I'm going to get into a polar orbit. I've set up this encounter slightly wrong. I need to be in a polar orbit because I brought that scanner with me to find where all the ore is. So I'm going to I'm going to burn north, basically burn, what is it? Radial? No, it's burn normal. I think it's normal. Anyway, yes, I'm going to do that so that we come over the pole so that I can use the scanner to find where the ore is so that I can actually mine the ore, which is quite an important part of mining, is knowing where the fuel is. So yeah. Anyway, then we do our orbital insertion burn, and I'm looking at it now and I'm like, this is just gilly. This is just gilly. Like, I've never really noticed that much before, but this is just gilly. Like, I often say that the moon landings in the Ike landings were faked in Kerbal Space Program because it looks so much like the moon. But I think the Gilly landings were faked on Bop, or the Bop landings were faked on Gilly. They look so similar. Anyway, we get a bunch of world firsts for doing a bunch of stuff, like getting into orbit and things and taking a scan. And you can see there's a bunch of ore, so we'll go and get that. But right now we have other things to do. The Concordia has arrived at Laythe. It, of course, if you remember, is getting its encounter directly with Laythe, so just flies on in, and we'll be able to fire up our engines and get into orbit. It actually flies on in right next to the colony ship by just sheer coincidence. We can wave at them as we fly past. Hopefully we won't slam into them. That would be... Oh, that'd be really annoying. Complete the Jool mission and it's like a gravity situation. I have to launch a rescue mission to Jool. I mean, it would be cool, but it'd be a hassle, you know? Anyway, that doesn't happen, and we do indeed get into orbit with another long burn. There were so many burns. Oh man, I'm never going to use ion engines after this. I can barely stand nuclear engines. But it was fine, and we do get ourselves into a nice, tight, circular orbit with the Concordia, which is... The Concordia's job is pretty much to... Well, it's ferrying, so it'll just kind of sit here until we need to go somewhere. The crew will probably go down to Laythe. But yeah, the Concordia will be used, of course, for going back to Kerbal and also exploring the Jool system. Because, you know, there's a lot of stuff here and we need a ship for going around and looking at stuff. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. Anyway, this is in orbit now, completing its third mission just amazingly. What a glorious ship. Anyway, Fuel System 2 gets here, which is, of course, the fuel shuttle and station for Bop. And yeah, we're just going to get into orbit, which is very quick because I brought a mainsail on this craft. The mainsail will be decoupled when we no longer need it, but it made this just so much easier. It's just like, yeah, that'll take a minute, rather than that'll take half an hour to do that burn. So yeah. Anyway, we set up our encounter there, as you just kind of briefly saw, so that we can encounter Bop and arrive and, well, just start, you know, complementing the fueling system. Well, completing the fueling system. This is all needed. The shuttle has to go and land on Bop to get it and put it in the station so that something else can go and grab the fuel from the station. It's all, yeah, it all works like that. Anyway, so yes, we complete the burn very quickly with that mainsail. God, I love having just proper engines. And then we arrive. We're going to get into a fairly kind of normal orbit around the equator-ish with this station, just to make it easier meeting up with it. It doesn't need to be around the poles because it's not looking for fuel. And yes, of course, it does it very quickly with its mainsail engine, as I'm very happy to see, and all is good. So, the second to last thing to get into orbit will be the Nighthawk planes, which of course are using a Tylo encounter to fling themselves into a beautiful orbit very freely. No fuel expended, except they will require fuel to get to Laythe, so it only saves about 400 meters per second. But hey, You know, fuel is fuel. And any fuel we can save in the shuttle is very useful because it needs it to go up to Bop and grab fuel. So yes, we do a little bit of tweaking, and we're actually going to be able to get into just right into Laythe orbit as well, just by kind of flying up there and just getting captured, which is kind of cool. Because yeah, saves more fuel. So we do a bit of a burn to just push ourselves into that position, so that it can come and it'll just fly by and grab us, and it'll be like, hey Laythe, and it'll be like, hey bro, and then you're staying with me, buddy. You don't have to spend any fuel to stay with me. And we will have to get into a lower orbit, but yeah, I don't know why I'm anthropomorphizing moons, but you know, it's just something we do. Anyway, so we complete the burn, all is good. However, it turns out that kind of beautiful sort of getting a free orbit isn't actually going to happen, because after a little bit of checking and totally not accidentally happening, I find that I'm actually going to encounter Laythe earlier and just slam into it. So what I'm going to do is just do a burn so that I don't slam into Laythe when I first encounter it, and just get into orbit like that, which means we won't get the other encounter, but we'll get one earlier, just slightly less efficiently, which is a bit of a shame, but it doesn't matter too much. So we fire up the engines, we get our new encounter, and this way we won't die, which is good, because we need these planes for going to Laythe in a non-fiery way. So yeah, we will still have to expend that little bit of fuel to get into orbit, but it doesn't matter too much. It wouldn't be much more than it would require to circularize that other encounter anyway. So yes, this fires up the engines, and when it's all done, I think it'll still have about 400 meters per second of delta V, and when we take the planes off, that's about a kilometer per second of delta V. So this probably will be able to go up to Bop just straight away and start grabbing fuel, which is nice. The burn, of course, takes a while, as they always do, but it does eventually get into orbit. And all is good, the planes are here. We can start dropping Kerbals down to Laythe, very controlledly and glidily. So yes, now the final thing to get into orbit is, of course, the freighter carrying the base, getting here last because of its slow burningness. So yes, this burn obviously takes all of time, but I have discovered there's actually some extra fuel left in the top tank, some liquid fuel and oxidizer, so at some point, probably when I encounter Laythe, I'm actually going to be able to use the vector engines again. It turns out they burned out way earlier than I thought they would, because for some reason, they didn't use the liquid fuel and oxidizer in a couple of the tanks, which were connected to other tanks they were burning from, but I have no idea why, but it means I have a little extra fuel now, which is nice, because we need it. So yes, we get our encounter. We're actually going to put it at this kind of inclination, so we can choose where to land a little better, because of course these are the base parts, so they need to be able to choose a piece of land to land on, which might not necessarily be exactly on the equator. Anyway, so yes, we activate the accidental reserve fuel, and now we can use our vector engines to get into orbit. The only problem with this is it flexes the vehicle like crazy, so I have to turn the gimbal on just to kind of keep it under control while we're firing these engines. And they do burn out before the burn is completed, but they made this just a little nicer, you know, just a little easier and a little quicker. And eventually we do, of course, get into orbit. And now, I thought I'd end the episode by landing the main base part. I've selected myself a nice landing site. It is near the biggest bit of, the biggest kind of continent on, well, the biggest set of islands. The biggest set of islands on Laythe. There's just lots of land there for potential expansion and exploration. There's ocean everywhere. There's like lagoons and stuff. Basically, if you look at a map of Laythe, you can just see it's the biggest part. You can't see it very well here because it's in the dark, and Scatterer makes the dark really dark. But basically, it's the biggest set of islands on Laythe, which I thought would be a nice place to land. However, Jool isn't actually visible in the sky, which is a shame because it's tidally locked. So we won't be able to see Jool from the base, but we can see Jool from orbit anyway. And everyone always lands with Jool in the sky. I want to land somewhere new, you know, on the biggest set of islands. We'll have the most time to explore, and we can just, you know, explore more of Laythe with planes and go and see Jool from Laythe. And we've already seen it with probes. I was a little bummed out, but yeah. Anyway, so we start making entry with our main base section. I accidentally decouple the heat shield instead of inflating it, but it turns out it doesn't matter, which is lucky because this is the main base part. This is, of course, the habitation unit. It's actually a bit of an homage to Macy Dean's Halcyon 1 housing unit, given that it's kind of 4 outer things around a center one. It doesn't look exactly the same, but that's sort of what it's based on. So if you ever watched him, you'll know why it looks like this and not like anything else I usually build. But I thought this would be good because it would be the easiest to re-enter as well, because it's kind of fairly regular shaped. This will of course be joined by the life support unit and the power units to make it a full nice looking base, and also some planes and Kerbals at some point, so that'll be quite fantastic. Also the nice thing about deploying the heat shield too early is we get to use the engines on descent, so I can pick my landing site a little bit. You can see this island is quite big, which is good because none of the islands on, well, very few of the islands on Laythe are very big at all and just kind of difficult. But this one, definitely, I think, the best island for landmass. Definitely the bit we want to control in the Laythe War. Laythe War? What? No, I actually don't know if there'll be a Laythe War. Maybe in Mine and Penguin's next series, who knows, you know? I mean, all of these series are totally connected, so who knows? But no, we're not thinking about war right now. We're thinking about, well, just sitting gloriously on the surface of Laythe in our scientific experiments, our just holiday making, just peace among Kerbals. In fact, I'm sure many of the Kerbals will elect to stay here, to colonize forever, rather than heading back to Kerbin, which they have seen for the whole of their lives. They would rather see something new. Anyway, we'll think about that later though. Right now we need to land this base safely. So it starts to flip, but I deploy the parachutes quickly to pull me back into the right orientation. I deploy that little piece of metal on the bottom and it destroys one of my landing legs, which is a little bit annoying. You can see it just ripped one off. So now it looks a little bit janky if you look at it from the right side, but it should be fine. I mean, the landing legs do their thing. It's, yeah, they'll work with missing one, but it's just kind of annoying that it stripped one off for no reason. Anyway, so yes, this will go down and land now on its landing legs. I hope I included ladders. Shit, did I include ladders? I can't really see from here. Well, if I didn't, you know, we'll jump or undeploy the landing legs. I'm good at planning. Anyway, let's just omit that. And look at it, we're landing our base on Laythe. We'll fire up the engines to touch down gently and screw it up a little bit, but all basically works out. And we touch down gently enough. And there we are, the base on Laythe. It's obviously not complete yet, but that is the habitation module, and I actually quite like how this looks. I didn't turn on the lights in the dark for some reason. I really should have. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll do that next episode. But there are lights on this, so in the dark it will look rather nice. But for now, we'll just watch the sky turn around and not see Jool. This is when I realize I can't see Jool, and I'm like, oh, fuck, I fucked up. But I'm actually pretty happy with this landing site, and we can see Jool whenever we want, you know? We can see it from other planets or from other parts of Laythe. We're actually just missed it though, so I was a bit like, oh, still though. Anyway, let's just watch the night pass and all will be well. I should have also turned on the lights. I forgot to do that. I'm sorry. I screwed up everything. You know, pack it up, go home. We're going back to Kerbin. Anyway, no, of course, we can't go back to Kerbin. We have many more things to do. And that will all be in future episodes when we set up our mining operation, start getting fuel back, maybe head back to Kerbin a little bit, send some Kerbals down to Laythe, do all of those fun things. But like I said, that will be in future episodes. But I hope you've enjoyed this episode. This has been KSP with Tape. I will see you next time.